Good morning, Sunnyside. How y'all doing today? Good. My name is Corey. I am one of the pastors here at this church, and it is a privilege to be able to be with you this morning and have an opportunity to talk to you. It has come to my attention that I talk kind of fast. Anybody? I see your heads nodding, all right. And I'm also from Kentucky. This is like double negative, so I've got a sweet southern twang that I can't do anything about, all right? But I'm fully aware that I talk fast, and so I'm going to do the very best I can to slow down a little bit so that Eric can understand me, all right? So just joking. So I'm going to do my best, but here's the deal. I tend to talk faster when I get excited, and that's probably one of the issues that I've had over the last several weeks. Is I'm super excited about what God is doing in and through this place. I'm super excited about our topic that we're going to get to dive into today, and so have some grace with me, but also understand I'm fully aware that I talk fast, and I'm trying to slow down, okay? So with that being said, I actually have a video I want to show you guys as we start this conversation about seeing people. Go ahead and watch this.
How many passes does the team in white make?
Go!
The answer is 13. But did you see the moonwalking bear?
That's stupid. I swear the first time I saw this, I was like, there's no way that there was a bear in there. Like, I've replayed it over again. It's there the whole time. So now some of you guys have probably seen this before, but for those of you all that didn't, think back to that. We miss stuff all the time. I think y'all have heard of selective hearing, right? I think we have selective seeing as well. We see things and people that we want to see. And maybe it's because of what we've trained ourselves to do. Sometimes maybe it's because of what our culture has conditioned us to, but we miss things all the time. We are all at some level guilty of being blind at some level, right? We miss stuff all the time. It can be right in front of us and we still miss it. As a matter of fact, my wife has this bag she calls a purse. I call it the bag of abyss, all right? Anybody else? Like your wife's had one of those things, okay? Every once in a while, she'll ask me to go grab something from this. And I'm like, yeah, right, this is not going to work out. So I go and I'm looking through this. I'm filtering through. I'm like upside down trying to find this. I can't find it anywhere. It is the bag of abyss. It's gone. And I tell my wife, babe, I can't see it. I can't find it anywhere. Of course, she comes over. She opens it up. And what does she do? Pulls that thing right out because she knows exactly where it's at, right? We do this. We miss stuff all the time. I was telling Eric that story. He's like, we actually got a term in our family for that. And I said, what's that? He's like, when I can't find something and I say I can't see it, my wife or other family members will say, did you man look or did you look? Said, yeah, I get it. I'm there, right? But we miss stuff all the time. And if we're just missing stuff, not a big deal. If we're blind to stuff, not a big deal. But when we're blind to people, guys, that's a big deal. That is a big deal, and unfortunately, I think it's an American culture thing, but more these days than ever, we are blind to people. And if we are going to be people who follow after Jesus, this is one of those things that we've got to reclaim. We've got to reclaim our sight. We've got to be able to find our verb. That verb is see. Now, we've been in a series called Jesus Verbs over the last several weeks, and we've taken a look at some verbs that as Christians, we might have kind of been remiss about. Like, we've not acted those words out in our life as much as we should. And so today, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a look at how to see again. Because if we're going to follow Jesus, it requires being able to see people the way that he tells us to see them. Jesus realized that many of the people he was engaging with, he was talking with, he was interacting with, they had the same sight problem that we have today. This is not necessarily a new thing. And so as he's talking to these guys, most of the time these religious guys, what he was finding out was that these guys were more concerned about obeying the law and being in right standing with God, that they actually forgot that the very way in which they can love God is to show love to people. That's how you show love. But you can't love people without first seeing people. And so Jesus decides he's going to help people see people by telling them a story, by telling them a parable, which is simply a story with a point to it, all right? And Jesus, he does this all the time in his ministry. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you guys turn with me to Luke chapter 10. Open up your Bibles, turn them on however you want to. Get to Luke chapter 10, and we're going to walk through this story. Now, when you get there, you're going to realize, oh, this is something that I've heard before. Most of you guys are going to be very familiar with this story. It's the story of the Good Samaritan. But can I beg and plead with you this morning not to let the familiarity with this passage, with this story, cloud what God actually wants you to see in it today? Because I think he might actually show you some new perspective. Let's dive in. And in chapter 10, starting in verse 30, I believe. There once was a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. Now, we're not told a whole lot about this guy that Jesus introduces in this story, but we know that he's traveling, and he's going from Jerusalem to Jericho, and it's a pretty long, arduous journey. It's very desolate. There's a portion of this journey that's actually considered the way of blood, because oftentimes people would get robbed in this particular area. And unfortunately, that's exactly what happens to this guy. On his way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, they beat him up, and they went off, leaving him half dead. Now, again, this is an incredibly desolate place, and so if he's left half dead on this road, most likely this guy is going to die unless somebody comes along. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road. A holy man, a man of God, a person who understands God's desire and will. He just happens to be coming along the way, and this guy who's had a very unfortunate day has got to be thinking, hey, things are shaping up. They're turning up. Like, it's going to be okay. But as you all know in the story, that's not what happens. But when he saw him, he angled across to the other side and passed by. But it's okay, because then a Levite, religious man, he shows up. Surely he's going to help. But no, he doesn't. He avoided the injured man as well. Now, guys, these are not ordinary men. Rather, they're religious men. They're religious people. And oftentimes when we hear these stories, we kind of disassociate with them because of the language. We see priest and Levite, and that doesn't connect with us. And so allow me to put this in some language that we might gather. If Jesus was telling that story again in our place, I think he might use this word. He might say, and on the way, luckily, a pastor and one of his members of his church were on the same road. Okay? So insert yourself into this story. Insert yourself into this guy's situation and into his plight. I think we need to do that. Now, we are not given reasons for why these religious men decide to pass by. This is Jesus' story, but sometimes I find it beneficial to elaborate a little bit further so that I can connect with the story a little bit. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to give some reasons, some explanations, some excuses that these religious guys might have had along the road to avoid seeing this man. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give reasons that they and we, because we're entering this story along with them, might have to avoid seeing people. Maybe it was because these religious men were inconvenienced by the day. Now, we don't know exactly what these guys were going to do, but they're both religious guys. They're heading from Jerusalem to Jericho. And so most likely they were on their way to be able to perform some kind of religious service. That's a very important thing. These are very important people. They would have been the upper echelon of their society at this time. And so these are people who got places to go and people to see, just not that person that happened to be on the side of the road in need, because I've got something else to do. It's very likely that they were thinking in their head, this is not what I had planned for today. I'm busy. I have matters of importance that I have to tend to. If I stop them, I will be late to my thing. Have you guys ever been there before? Have you ever had something show up, something pop up, something that is really inconvenient, and you know that you probably should help, but because of something else that you got going on, you're like, that's going to make me late to my thing? Guys, I'm not unfamiliar with that. At the end of May, I was getting ready to take my family on a kayaking trip. It's going to be my younger two because my older two were still in school. And so we had to be back by a certain point in time. But it was taking longer to get everybody loaded up. And so we get everything loaded up, kayaks on, and now we got a shorter period of time to get there. But we start to head up the hill going to Woodland Park. And we turned to Cimarron, and all of a sudden it's like standstill traffic. There must have been some construction going on over there, like that ever happens, right? There's always construction over there. And so we're stuck, and I'm like, man, this is not fun. This is not awesome. Well, traffic starts to release, and it starts to go a little bit. So I'm like, all right, finally, we're getting going. And all of a sudden, right in front of me, this guy breaks down in front of me in his car. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I'm already frustrated by the situation, the scenario. But now I'm thinking, I'm already running late. The weather doesn't look like it's going to cooperate. I've not had my coffee. And this guy has the nerve to break down right in the left lane that turns into Dutch Bros, where I got to get my coffee. All right? And I'm ticked. I'm really mad, and I'm inconvenienced. It was about that time that my wife looks over to me, and she just says, hey, babe, maybe you should get out and help him. To which I looked at her and I said, maybe you should shut your pie hole. No, I'm just I did not say that, because if I said that, I would not be present here today to have this conversation with you. No, I didn't say that. I did shoot her a look like, really? And she's like, yeah, really. I'm ashamed of this. I'm ashamed of this, but this is me. This is me, and this is life, and this is God's grace. But if I would have been in that car by myself that day, I'd have gotten in the other lane. I'd have headed on to my thing that I had to go to. It was too big of an inconvenience for me. You know, maybe these religious guys actually had some like, you know, real legitimate concerns. Maybe they had a fear. I mean, they are, after all, on the road that is like named the bloody road, the bloody path, right? And so maybe they were thinking, well, if somebody hurt this guy, if I stop, maybe they'll hurt me. Or maybe they start to cycle those things like the paranoia thoughts where like, maybe that guy is actually in on it. Maybe if I stop to help this guy, they're all going to come out and jump me, and then like I'm going to get hurt. And so like you start to process these paranoia feelings and thoughts. And what happens is it keeps us from doing what's right. Have you ever known what the right thing to do is, but then you allow your mind to start processing through, and you decide that whatever it happens to be, you convince yourself not to do it? I call that paralyzed by panic, or we're frozen by fear, and all of a sudden we convince ourselves that even though we know it's the right thing that we should do, we allow our caution to outweigh our conviction. Guys, certainly we should use wisdom and caution, okay? We should always use wisdom. We should not just like throw caution out to the wind, but our caution, it should never trump us from doing what we know is right. We should never allow our caution to overcome our conviction. I don't see any of you guys writing that down. That's good stuff right there. You all need to write that down, okay? Never let your caution overcome your conviction. Now, it may change the way in which you approach something, okay? But don't let your caution overcome your conviction. Otherwise, it becomes fear. And fear paralyzes, and it keeps us from seeing people. You know, fear is oftentimes what leads us to judgment as well. I mean, how many times have you seen somebody and you automatically categorize them in your mind? I think that might have been what happened on the road. These guys are walking through, and this guy on the road is not like these religious guys, and so it made it a lot easier for them to ignore them and just continue on the way. Guys, we use this as an excuse all of the time when we're dealing with people that are not like us. They don't think like us, they don't look like us, they don't talk like us, they don't act like us, they don't believe like us, and it gives us an excuse not to see them. It's one of the reasons our country is so divided right now, is because we categorize them before we ever actually stop to see them, before we actually stop to get to know them, before we actually get to hear what it is that they believe. We've already put them in a box. We've categorized them. You see somebody with a MAGA hat on, or you see two women holding hands, or you see a punk kid wearing goth clothes, or a lady wearing too much makeup and too little clothes, or a guy with a cardboard sign on the side of the road, and all of a sudden we make a stat judgment about them, and we put them in a box, we put them in a category. And worse yet, we start to make determinations for them. I know who you are. I know what you've done. I know what you believe. Guys, we got to stop doing this. We got to stop doing this, because when we dehumanize a person, when we categorize a person, we dehumanize a person. When we categorize a person, we dehumanize a person. And what we do is we take their humanity away, the very thing that God has given them. We take it away by putting them in a box. We got to stop doing that. It's possible that the religious guys passed by because they didn't want to deal with the mess. I mean, think about it. This is just a story, but if this guy got beat up like he did, like he's bloody, he's bruised, they took his clothes, he's probably naked. Like, this is not a pretty sight. And for these guys to like stop and see this guy mean that they would have to enter into that mess. And maybe they just weren't prepared for that. They had their good tunic on that day. You know, I don't want to get messy. I don't want to get my hands dirty. Now, each of us that have actually stopped to see people for long enough, we know what that mess looks like, because people are messy. And the more that you actually stop to get involved in somebody else's life, the more that you realize that mess. It starts to surface. It starts to surface. You start to enter into somebody's story, into somebody's life, and you start to see the depression and the alcoholism and the addiction and the abuse and the relational woes and all the difficulties and the financial difficulties. And what you start to realize is that everyone's normal until you get to know them, right? And when you get to know them, when you get to see them, man, we're all a mess. Quite frankly, it's easier to simply stay on the surface or to avoid somebody altogether than to enter the mess of somebody else's life. Sometimes that's why we don't see people. Now, I'm going to take some of the excuses away. I'm just going to say maybe these religious guys were just self-absorbed. Maybe they were just so consumed with their own life and their destination, they didn't even give a second thought to this obstacle in the middle of the road. Did you hear how I labeled this? That's crass, isn't it? But if we're being completely honest with ourselves, isn't this how we see people sometimes? There's simply an obstacle in my way of where I'm going. Or maybe they're just a person, a cog in the place that I'm going to help me get there. But I don't stop long enough to be able to see them. Guys, we do this, and this is the curse of our American culture. We are completely self-absorbed. We do this all the time. And we don't even stop to see that these people are people that really matter to God. I did this recently myself. About a month and a half ago, I broke my collarbone. Most of you guys have heard about that. I was in a lot of pain. I'm trying to get seen as quickly as I possibly could. And so we found this doctor's office, and they got me in. I got to see the doctor the very next day. He's a great guy. And so I'm thinking, okay, now I'm going to be able to get in maybe in a week and get this thing all fixed up. Well, then I found out he has to leave town, and then I don't hear back from him or his assistant for a little while. And then when I do, I hear that it's going to be 2.5 weeks for me to wait before I can even get this thing healed. And so we're emailing, we're calling, we're texting, we're trying to do whatever we can to figure out how we can get this thing moved up, and it's not going to get moved up. And so again, once I'm so upset, and I'm about to let the doctor have it. So I've got this meeting set with him, and we're doing final surgery kind of things, and I want to let him know how I feel about this. And then he starts to explain to me that the reason why he was absent and he was out of town was because his mother had just passed away, and he had spent the last few days burying her. Guys, I can be a jerk sometimes. And I got to stop telling you these stories. Otherwise, you guys are not going to think that I'm an awesome person. Here I am, soaking about my pain that I have in my shoulder when this guy has just lost his mom. It reminded me of an old adage: be kind. Be kind to everyone, because you never know what someone else is going through. That will never happen if you can't take your eyes off yourself long enough to be able to see other people. Well, thank goodness that Jesus doesn't end the story with these two guys that get it wrong on the front side. He introduces us to a new character, and that character happens to be a Samaritan. Now, a little side note, just kind of historical information. Not all of Jesus' parables were original with Jesus. Oftentimes what he would do is he would take a common story or a parable or an adage, and he would take it and then he would switch it. And so in this particular case, people would have been familiar with this particular story, and when they hear the word Samaritan, they would know, oh, here comes the bad guy. Like, he's the one that they're going to dump on. But he's inserting this in a completely different way. He says, and here comes the Samaritan, and they're like, oh, no, you're not going to make him the hero of the story, are you? And Jesus is like, yeah, actually I am. I'm going to make him the hero because you guys need to hear this. And so he carries on. He says, a Samaritan traveling on the road came on him. And when he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. When he saw the man's condition, he didn't just notice him, he saw him. And he looked at him long enough to be able to see what was actually going on. He saw his condition, and he was moved to compassion. You see, it's possible for you to look at somebody and not see them. We do this all the time. I want to give you just an example, because I think we've all been there at some point in time in our life. We've all been guilty of this. We pull up to a stoplight and we realize that we are actually going to be right on the side of a person holding one of these signs, right? And they're sitting there, and it might be a guy or a gal, and they're standing on the side and they're holding their sign, and we pull up to the light, and we don't really want to talk to somebody that day. So what do? It's like, what's on the radio? Like, I need to adjust this over here like this. Hey, kids, do not make eye contact with that person up there. Roll up the windows. You are laughing. You do this. You know it, all right? We do. Why do we do that? It's not necessarily because we don't want to give them money. We don't want to see them because that means that there would be a person behind this sign. And that might require something of us. Now, guys, I'm not advocating for necessarily giving money to every homeless person that you see. Actually, that we're told by the partnerships that we have that is a bad idea. Don't do that. Let's support these other programs that we have going on. But you know one of the very best things you could possibly do for somebody who's standing on the side holding one of these signs? Look them straight in the eye. Acknowledge them. Smile. You don't have to give them a thing. Just give them respect. See them as a person. You know what I've come to find out? Is that every single one of us is holding a sign like this. Every single one of us. It may look different, but it has the same thing written on it. And that's this. Do you see me? Do you see me? That's really the question that somebody holding one of these signs up on the side of the road is asking, is do you see me? But it's the same sign that people are asking when you're checking out at the grocery store, or your waitress comes up to you, or the coworker who doesn't have a whole lot of friends at work, or maybe it's a student at school that sits at the lunch table every day by themselves, or the new kid that's at school that's saying, "Do you see me?" Maybe it's your spouse that you haven't given a whole lot of attention to lately, and you've not taken them on a date, and you've not given them the value that they have. Why is it that our kids have to beg for our attention? Daddy, look, watch, see. They're asking this. Do you see me? Can we put down our phones long enough? Interrupt our lives long enough? Be inconvenienced enough to be able to stop and see somebody? Because that's the question that every single person is ultimately asking. But you can't start seeing others until you start taking your eyes off of self. I love the definition of humility here. It says this, humility is not thinking less of yourself, but it's thinking of yourself less. And when you start thinking of yourself less, you're actually giving yourself the ability to be able to think of other people more. And when you start to think of other people more and you start to see them, you start to see their condition, you start to see what they're going through, and all of a sudden you have the availability to be moved by compassion. You know, there's 3 letters in the alphabet that stand out among all of the letters of the alphabet. They're the most powerful letters in the alphabet, and here they are because they answered that question. I see you. One of the most powerful statements in our English vocabulary, the best phrases that you could offer to somebody is simply, I see you, because everybody's asking this question, do you see me? Now, I don't know what that looks like for you. I don't know how you answer that in the way. Maybe it's verbally just being able to say, I see you. Or maybe it is like locking eyes with somebody and just giving them a smile. Or maybe it's saying, hey, welcome to church. We're so glad to have you. Maybe it's sitting down and actually hearing somebody's story. Maybe it's engaging with that kid who's sitting by themselves at school. Maybe it's writing a letter to somebody that you've seen that they may not know that you've noticed them. But we got to start answering this question for people if we're going to be followers of Jesus. I see you. Eric and myself and Samantha were out to lunch this past week at a Greek restaurant not far down the road. And there's a gal, and I've seen her there before, but she's just kind of like a wallflower type, doesn't like say much more than, you know, what did you want to eat, that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure if I've ever seen her smile, but she's taken our order, and so we go to sit down, and she had to bring some like ketchup or something to our table. And I was reminded of a conversation I'd had with Eric earlier that week, a practice that he oftentimes puts into place. And so I decided to do that myself. And so I asked her name, and she said, well, my name's Krista. And I said, we're getting ready to pray. Is there anything that we can pray for you about? And she immediately was like, no, and just kind of like backs away. You can see like she's incredibly shy and like she didn't know how to receive that. And so I'm like, okay. But something incredible happened. And you would have missed it, like you wouldn't have seen it, but I saw it because I was looking for it. Something incredible happened as we started to leave that day. She stepped away from her cash register. And she got our attention, and she smiled at us, and she said, hey, have a great day. You see, Krista, she didn't really want us to pray for her, but we walked away that day, and she knew that she had been seen. She knew that she had been seen. Guys, we got to do this, just like the Samaritan. And what I love is that the Samaritan doesn't just see him, he stops and he enters into his story. Take a look at how he chooses to enter into his story. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him onto his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take good care of him. And if it costs me any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back. Guys, I know this is just a story. It's a story about a guy. It's a fictional story, but we have so much to learn from this Good Samaritan. And when you stop to think about it, this is Jesus' way of actually telling us how we're supposed to see people, how he wants us to be able to see people. One of the first things that you need to know is that when you see somebody, it's going to cost you. It cost the Samaritans to stop and see this man. It cost them time. It cost them mess, inconvenience, money. But you see all these ways in which he actually chose to enter into this guy's story, and he was commended for it. This is how Jesus wants us to enter into this. Jesus wants us to see people the same way that Samaritans saw these people. And when you stop long enough, what you realize is that every single person has the same DNA of our Maker. Every single person that you run into has been made in the image of God. Furthermore, Jesus Christ has come to this earth and died and shed his blood on the cross for that person, the same as he has for you and for me. In that regard, every single person that you come in contact with has an intrinsic value built into that person and an infinite value because of what Jesus has done. We should start seeing people that way. I love what C.S. Lewis has to say about that. He says, you've never met a mere mortal. You've never met a mere mortal. Not a single person that you walk around or see are they a mere mortal. Instead, they're an eternal being made in the image of God and bought with the blood of Christ. Therefore, we should approach people with this perspective. And here's the perspective. Every person has a story, and every story matters to God. I want you all to say that with me, right? Every person has a story, and every story matters to God. But you have to slow down long enough to be able to see their story. You have to slow down long enough to be able to see their story. And that requires 2 things. And so as we kind of come to a close in our conversation today, I'm going to give you 2 practical things that we need to do in order to be able to better see people's story. And here they are. You have to be intentional, and you have to live interruptible. Being intentional and living interruptible, those are qualities that are required to be able to see that every story matters to God. There are people that we already are aware of, people that we have noticed, people that the Lord might have even have brought to mind as we're talking right now. Like somebody is in your mind and you're thinking, you know what, I've gone way too long avoiding that person, whether it's a neighbor or a coworker or a family member, whatever it happens to be. Somebody's already in your mind. You know them, you've noticed them, but you haven't done anything about it. Being intentional says, I'm going to make some space in my life, and I am going to proactively bridge that gap, and I'm going to go down to that neighbor and invite them over to my home. Or I'm going to stop and say hi to that guy that I see every week on the side of the road, and I never got to hear his story. That's what being intentional looks like. It's actually giving space to be able to hear somebody's story, and you make yourself available for those kind of conversations. But there's another way in which we can actually be able to hear people's stories and slow down, and that's living interruptible. Living interruptible is when someone crosses our path or we cross theirs unexpectedly, but we have the eyesight to know that they have a story that matters to God. This is a different kind of availability. This is the kind of availability that says, Lord, I want to see people like you see them. I want to be able to have eyes to be able to see the things that I would oftentimes avoid or overlook. So Lord, today, this is your day. Will you just put somebody in my path and then make me aware whenever I happen to come across them that this is a person that you want me to see today? And it's not convenient. Oftentimes, it's a big interruption to your life, but when you pray prayers like that, God puts people in your path like that. I promise he does. At the same Greek restaurant about a year ago, I'd been going there kind of frequently and doing some counseling with some people, having conversations with other people, and the owner of the shop had kind of taken notice of that. And after I finished a meeting and I had a place to go, she came and she asked me if she could talk with me for a minute, and she had a cherry Coke in her hand. So I said, absolutely, you have cherry Coke. I'll talk with you. And so she hands me the cherry Coke, and then she asked me this question. I didn't know how to respond. She said, are you a holy man? And I was thinking to myself, it depends on the day. But I said, yeah, I guess you could consider that. Like I'm a pastor at a church. And she said, can I talk with you about something? And I said, sure, Sharzi, what's going on? And so She started to unload some things that are going on in her life, and she just didn't know how to respond to, and she just needed some counsel and some wisdom and somebody to pray for her. On a typical day, I probably would have said maybe another time. But because I was practicing living an interruptible life, I knew that that conversation right there was the exact one that Jesus wanted me to have, even if it meant missing a meeting that I had later on. Guys, I disappointed Jesus in lots of ways, but I think he was proud of me that day because I stopped long enough to be able to see somebody's story. Jesus finishes off the story. So what do you think? Which of these three became a neighbor to the man attacked by the robbers? Well, the one who treated him kindly, the religious scholar responded. Jesus said, go and do the same. So what does it look like for us to go and do the same? With the context of what we've been able to see today, I want to make myself abundantly clear because we can miss out on how we typically read this, and I don't want us to do that. What I'm not talking about is I'm not talking about acts of kindness, though that may be included in this. What I'm also not talking about is I'm not talking about having conversations that lead to a saving faith in Jesus, although that may happen through this process. Okay, so I'm not talking about doing these acts of kindness or evangelism. I'm talking about us being able to see people the same way that the Samaritan saw this guy. Us being able to see people the way in which Jesus desperately wants us to see people. And I think it starts with a simple question and a little accountability. And here's the question. Whose story did you see this week? Whose story did you see this week? I truly believe that if we can ask and answer that question, and we start to see people like Jesus wants us to see people, we start seeing people like the Samaritan saw this guy, we're going to be willing to be inconvenienced, we're going to drop our judgment and our fear, we're going to be willing to dive in and into the mess of somebody's life, and we're going to stop seeing ourselves long enough to be able to see their situation. We're going to start pleasing Jesus by seeing people. Guys, this is not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy. So the simple question of being able to train ourselves, whose story did you see this week, I think becomes a foundational question for us as a church. And so whether you're a group leader or a parent or a mentor or a pastor or an elder in this place, that's going to be a question we're going to start asking. And I'm going to beg and plead that you would ask that of other people. Whose story did you see this week? Because if we don't start asking that, we won't see people. We won't see people the way that God wants us to. But if we do, look out. Look out, because every person has a story, and every story matters to God. And when we stop to notice somebody's story and they see that we care enough to be able to enter into that, then they start to wonder about our story. And then they start to see the story of Jesus intertwining our story. And then they start to be able to see God's story intersecting their story. But we got to take our eyes off ourselves long enough to be able to see other people. So here's the deal, guys. This week in my correspondence, my W1234, I'm going to send that out, and I'm going to ask this question of you. And I would love to be completely overwhelmed with responses from you guys this week. This is our action step. This is what we're calling you to do. This is the live it point for our church today. See someone's story this week that you wouldn't have seen otherwise unless you were intentional or interruptible. And then I want you to share that with somebody, but I would be blessed if you shared that with me. Just respond back to that W1234, and we'll do that. All right, I'm gonna conclude with some prayer, and then we're gonna invite the band back up here, and we're gonna enter into a time of communion and some songs. So, Father, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to have this conversation that I think is such a necessary conversation. I pray that through these words that I've done justice to that, but Lord, I just pray that your words would speak stronger than mine. Father, I pray that these guys would be able to see that this is not just a message that I've prepared, but Father, this is something that you've instilled in my life, that you want to instill in this church. And I pray that we would be a people who see people. I pray that, Father, we would have the same response to the man that you healed who was blind from birth, who said, I was blind, but now I see. I see people the way that you want me to see them, and by seeing them, they are now able to see you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.